The descent was rapid. At 17 minutes past 2, J.T. Maston and his companions had reached the bottom of the Pacific, but they saw nothing but an arid desert, no longer animated by either fauna or flora. By the light of their lamps, furnished with powerful reflectors, they could see the dark beds of the ocean for a considerable extent of view, but the projectile was nowhere to be seen. The impatience of these bold divers cannot be described, and having an electrical communication with the corvette, they made a signal already agreed upon, and for the space of a mile the Susquehanna moved their chamber along some yards above the bottom. Thus they explored the whole submarine plain, deceived at every turn by optical illusions, which almost broke their hearts. Here a rock, there a projection from the ground, seemed to be the much sought-for projectile, but their mistake was soon discovered, and then they were in despair. "But where are they, where are they?" cried J.T. Maston, and the poor man called loudly upon Nicole, Barbicane, and Michel Ardan, as if his unfortunate friends could either hear or answer him through such an impenetrable medium. The search continued under these conditions until the vitiated air compelled the divers to ascend. The hauling in began about 6 in the evening, and was not ended before midnight. "Tomorrow," said J.T. Maston, as he set foot on the bridge of the corvette. "Yes," answered Captain Blomsberry, "and on another spot." "Yes." J.T. Maston did not doubt of their final success, but his companions, no longer upheld by the excitement of the first hours, understood all the difficulty of the enterprise. What seemed easy at San Francisco seemed here in the wide ocean almost impossible. The chances of success diminished in rapid proportion, and it was from chance alone that the meeting with the projectile might be expected. The next day, the 24th, in spite of the fatigue of the previous day, the operation was renewed. The corvette advanced some minutes to westward, and the apparatus, provided with air, bore the same explorers to the depths of the ocean. The whole day passed in fruitless research. The bed of the sea was a desert. The 25th brought no other result, nor the 26th. It was disheartening. They thought of those unfortunates shut up in the projectile for 26 days. Perhaps at that moment, they were experiencing the first approach of suffocation. That is, if they had escaped the dangers of their fall. The air was spent, and doubtless with the air all their morale. "The air, possibly," answered J.T. Maston resolutely, "but their morale never." On the 28th, after 2 more days of search, all hope was gone. This projectile was but an atom in the immensity of the ocean. They must give up all idea of finding it. But J.T. Maston would not hear of going away. He would not abandon the place without at least discovering the tomb of his friends. But Commander Blomsberry could no longer persist, and in spite of the exclamations of the worthy secretary, was obliged to give the order to sail. On the 29th of December, at 9 a.m., the Susquehanna, heading northeast, resumed her course to the Bay of San Francisco. It was 10 in the morning. The corvette was under half steam, as it was regretting to leave the spot where the catastrophe had taken place, when a sailor, perched on the main-top gallant crosstrees watching the sea, cried suddenly, "A buoy on the lee bow." But J.T. Maston would not hear of going away. He would not abandon the place, without at least discovering the tomb of his friends, but Commander Blomsberry could no longer persist, and in spite of the exclamations of the worthy secretary, was obliged to give the order to sail. On the 29th of December at 9 a.m., the Susquehanna, heading northeast, resumed her course to the Bay of San Francisco. It was 10 in the morning. The corvette was under half steam, as it was regretting to leave the spot where the catastrophe had taken place, when a sailor, perched on the maintop gallant crosstrees watching the sea, cried suddenly, "A buoy on the lee bow." The officers looked in the direction indicated, and by the help of their glasses saw that the object signaled had the appearance of one of those buoys which are used to mark the passages of bays or rivers, but, singularly to say, a flag floating on the wind surmounted its cone, which emerged 5 or 6 feet out of water. This buoy shone under the rays of the sun, as if it had been made of plates of silver. Commander Blomsberry, J.T. Maston, and the delegates of the gun club were mounted on the bridge, examining this object straying at random on the waves. All looked with feverish anxiety, but in silence. None dared give expression to the thoughts which came to the minds of all. The corvette approached to within 2 cables' lengths of the object. A shudder ran through the whole crew. That flag was the American flag. At this moment a perfect howling was heard. It was the brave J.T. Maston, who had just fallen all in a heap, forgetting on the one hand that his right arm had been replaced by an iron hook, and on the other, that a simple gutta-percha cap covered his brain box. He had given himself a formidable blow. They hurried toward him, picked him up, restored him to life, and what were his first words? "Ah, trebly brutes, quadruply idiots, quintuply boobies that we are." "What is it?" exclaimed everyone around him. "What is it? Come, speak." "It is, simpletons," howled the terrible secretary. "It is that the projectile only weighs 19,250 pounds. Well, and that it displaces 28 tons, or in other words 56,000 pounds, and that consequently it floats." Ah, what stress the worthy man had laid on the verb float! And it was true, yes. All these savants had forgotten this fundamental law, namely, that on account of its specific lightness, the projectile, after having been drawn by its fall to the greatest depths of the ocean, must naturally return to the surface, and now it was floating quietly at the mercy of the waves. The boats were put to sea. J.T. Maston and his friends had rushed into them. Excitement was at its height. Every heart beat loudly. While they advanced to the projectile, what did it contain? Living or dead? Living, yes, living, at least, unless death had struck Barbicane and his 2 friends. Since they had hoisted the flag, profound silence reigned on the boats. All were breathless, eyes no longer saw. One of the scuttles of the projectile was open. Some pieces of glass remained in the frame, showing that it had been broken. This scuttle was actually 5 feet above the water. A boat came alongside, that of J.T. Maston, and J.T. Maston rushed to the broken window. At that moment, they heard a clear and merry voice, the voice of Michel Ardan, exclaiming in an accent of triumph, "Whitehall, Barbicane, Whitehall." Barbicane, Michel Ardan, and Nicole were playing at dominoes. CHAPTER 23 THEEND. We may remember the intense sympathy which had accompanied the travelers on their departure, if at the beginning of the enterprise they had excited such emotion, both in the Old and New World. With what enthusiasm would they be received on their return? The millions of spectators, which had beset the peninsula of Florida, would they not rush to meet these sublime adventurers? Those legions of strangers, hurrying from all parts of the globe toward the American shores, would they leave the Union without having seen Barbicane, Nicholl, and Michel Ardan? No, and the ardent passion of the public was bound to respond worthily to the greatness of the enterprise. Human creatures, who had left the terrestrial sphere and returned after this strange voyage into celestial space, could not fail to be received as the prophet Elias would be if he came back to earth, to see them first, and then to hear them. Such was the universal longing. Barbicane, Michel Ardan, Nicholl, and the delegates of the Gun Club, returning without delay to Baltimore, were received with indescribable enthusiasm. The notes of President Barbicane's voyage were ready to be given to the public. The New York Herald bought the manuscript at a price not yet known, but which must have been very high indeed, during the publication of A Journey to the Moon. The sale of this paper amounted to 5 millions of copies. 3 days after the return of the travelers to the earth, the slightest detail of their expedition was known. There remained nothing more but to see the heroes of this superhuman enterprise. The expedition of Barbicane and his friends round the moon had enabled them to correct the many admitted theories regarding the terrestrial satellite. These savants had observed de visu, and under particular circumstances, they knew what systems should be rejected, what retained with regard to the formation of that orb, its origin, its habitability, its past, present, and future had even given up their last secrets. Who could advance objections against conscientious observers, who at less than 24 miles distance had marked that curious mountain of Tycho, the strangest system of lunar orography? How answer those savants, whose sight had penetrated the abyss of Pluto's circle? How contradict those bold ones, whom the chances of their enterprise had borne over, that invisible face of the disk, which no human eye until then had ever seen? It was now their turn to impose some limit on that selenographic science, which had reconstructed the lunar world as Cuvier did the skeleton of a fossil, and say, the moon was this, a habitable world inhabited before the earth. The moon is that, a world uninhabitable, and now uninhabited. To celebrate the return of its most illustrious member, and his two companions, the Gun Club decided upon giving a banquet, but a banquet worthy of the conquerors, worthy of the American people, and under such conditions, that all the inhabitants of the Union could directly take part in it. All the headlines of railroads in the States were joined by flying rails, and on all the platforms, lined with the same flags, and decorated with the same ornaments, were tables laid, and all served alike at certain hours, successively calculated, marked by electric clocks, which beat the seconds at the same time. The population were invited to take their places at the banquet tables. For 4 days, from the 5th to the 9th of January, the trains were stopped as they are on Sundays on the railways of the United States, and every road was open, one engine only at full speed, drawing a triumphal carriage, had the right of traveling for those 4 days on the railroads of the United States. The engine was manned by a driver and a stoker and bore, by special favor, the Hon. J.T. Maston, secretary of the Gun Club. The carriage was reserved for President Barbicane, Canal, Nicholl, and Michel Ardan. At the whistle of the driver, amid the hurrahs and all the admiring vociferations of the American language, the train left the platform of Baltimore. It traveled at a speed of 160 miles in the hour. But what was this speed compared with that which had carried the three heroes from the mouth of the Columbiad? Thus they sped from one town to the other, finding whole populations at table on their road, saluting them with the same acclamations, lavishing the same bravos. They traveled in this way through the east of the Union, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, the north and west by New York, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, returning to the south by Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana. They went to the southeast by Alabama and Florida, going up by Georgia and the Carolinas, visiting the center by Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and Indiana, and after quitting the Washington station, Ray entered Baltimore, where for 4 days one would have thought that the United States of America were seated at one immense banquet, saluting them simultaneously with the same hers. The apotheosis was worthy of these three heroes, whom fable would have placed in the rank of demigods. And now will this attempt, unprecedented in the annals of travels, lead to any practical result? Will direct communication with the moon ever be established? Will they ever lay the foundation of a traveling service through the solar world? Will they go from one planet to another, from Jupiter to Mercury, and after a while from one star to another, from the polar to Sirius? Will this means of locomotion allow us to visit those suns which swarm in the firmament? To such questions, no answer can be given, but knowing the bold ingenuity of the Anglo-Saxon race, no one would be astonished if the Americans seek to make some use of President Barbicane's attempt. Thus, some time after the return of the travelers, the public received with marked favor the announcement of a company, limited, with a capital of $100 million, divided into 100,000 shares of $1,000 each under the name of the National Company of Interstellar Communication, President Barbicane, Vice President Captain Nicole, Secretary J.T. Maston, Director of Movements Michel Arden. And as it is part of the American temperament to foresee everything in business, even failure, the Honorable Harry Trollope, Judge Commissioner, and Francis Drayton, Magistrate, were nominated beforehand. THEEND